All right, everybody, welcome to episode 37 of Hardpoints, the podcast about energy security and the startup economy and how they intersect to shape the world around you. Every time we get together, Neal and I unpack the real dynamics behind the headlines, what's changing, what it means, why it matters to you. Thanks for being here. A lot of stuff in the headlines, Neal, but how are you doing first?
Yeah, doing okay. It's been a busy week for Heirloom and for my nonprofit. So I'm playing catch up a little bit, but such is life. How about you?
It's good. It's good. I've got my brother-in-law's in town, so we're going to have him for dinner. And then one of my advisors, his daughter got into med school up here. My wife's a doctor, so I guess we get to be
Nice.
a family away from home for her. So that's kind of exciting.
Yeah, right
And
on. You
then,
barbecuing or something? Or
yeah, right. No, speaking of barbecuing, you guys are going to get roasted. Down there.
yeah,
Uh,
totally.
98 degrees in March in Los Angeles today or tomorrow. Isn't that what I saw?
Yeah. There's a heat advisory out, and it's March 11th. It's not. It's still technically winter.
Yeah, nearly 100 degrees, 20 to 30 degrees above average. I mean, like Southern California is not a cold place per se, but like
I love
still.
warm weather. I have no complaints, but yeah, it's just weird. It's a weird time, and I don't know. Maybe we'll have to break out the surfboards and get in the water.
Big heat dome going to be kind of settling over Colorado as well over the next couple of days. So kind of worried about that from a snowpack perspective. Like, it's a really
Mm.
low snowpack for most of the country, most of the western United States, I should say, right now. And this heat dome is just going to cause it all to melt away. It's going to be a rough fire season.
It's gonna be slushy. I think ski season's over. I don't know. Mentally, I've already kind of moved on.
I don't know if it really happened. Like I feel like in Colorado, we went straight from late fall to early spring. Like it's
Yeah.
March and my peach tree is in full bloom now. So
Yeah. I did get stuck in a blizzard for what it's worth. I mean, that was exciting.
yeah,
But that was mammoth.
you had your day of winter.
Then my
Congratulations.
one day. That's right. That's right. Also, before we move on, I wanted to apologize. We wanted to apologize for everybody
Hmm.
who's been following us on iTunes or Spotify that we just had a sort of process glitch. We've been posting these episodes on YouTube, but they didn't get up to iTunes or Spotify. So we're fixing that. Stand by. It'll get better.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are we talking about today, man?
Well, the question at hand is who killed 175 schoolgirls in Iran? February 28th, on the first day of the U.S. and Israeli strikes in Iran, a girls' elementary school in a town called Manab, which is a port city near the Strait of Hormuz, was hit 3 times. Between 168 and 188 children and teachers were killed. Video geolocated by Bellingcat, which is a UK sort of, let's call it like alternative truth-seeking news source. But then also NBC, CNN, BBC showed that a Tomahawk cruise missile hit that facility, which is adjacent to an IRGC base. That's an Iranian military base. But look, Mike, Tomahawks are American. The White House blamed Iran. But today we want to talk about what actually happened. And, this isn't the first time, U.S. forces or really any forces have hit the wrong target. But, how does this happen? We've got a unique perspective on that. And we want to offer up a little bit of like how it happens and what does it mean? So let me tee you up first. I mean, you did targeting. And this is sort of a post-flying career for you. So can you give me just a bit on like how a strike like this gets planned? And not just once, but we hit it 3 times. And that's not a stray. That's a strike package.
Yeah, sure is. So for a reminder for everybody, listening at home, my career was, I flew F-15, same as Neal for most of my career, but I had to take a disassociated sea tour, which was a pretty good deal for me because it was a sea tour where I never went to sea. And I was running cruise missile operations for the U.S. Sixth Fleet out of Naples, Italy. So, a lot of good living in southern Italy. Had a great time with that. But along the way, I had to go to targeting school before I showed up there, and then I was a cruise missile planner. So I planned Tomahawk strike missions, etc. So a couple of functions of the Tomahawk to maybe kind of just talk about there. Tomahawk echoes, the TLAM is it's also sometimes known, has the ability to kind of be redirected in flight. There is some capacity for communicating once it's launched. Has a really long flight time. It can be launched from, without talking about classified ranges, multiple hundreds of miles. So can be easily done. And the only people that really have them are the U.S. and the United Kingdom associated with that. So um, they can be launched by ships. They can be launched by submarines. Some of our biggest ones are in old ballistic missile submarines that used to be loaded up with like nuclear weapons. They kind of rebuilt them and put in, for every nuclear weapon, they put in a 4-pack of TLAMs. So they can launch like 100 TLAMs. They're just an absolute like battery of TLAMs. So the planning process for one of these is Intel comes down and they say, hey, here's kind of the mission that needs to be struck. Here's the target that needs to be hit. And then when you look at that, you say, okay, this is part of a kind of a bigger package that's part of the entire air war. And that air war, that strike package is coming, usually out of the CAOC, the Combined Air Operations Center, that controls all air operations for all allied forces in the area. So there's one there at Al Udeid, and so Air Force planners are putting that together, and they have folks like this was actually what I did my reserve work as well. I worked as like the NALO, which is to say the senior naval officer present in a CAOC in order to coordinate between naval aviation and Air Force aviation.
Halo is naval
It actually,
liaison.
no. So, well, there's the liaison NALO, which stood for Naval Amphibious Liaison Officer, and it comes
Okay.
historically from the days of where Navy ships didn't like have a whole bunch of airplanes and Tomahawks, but instead they just had big guns.
Mm.
And so it was about coordinating shore fires from
Anyway,
from
you're the Navy
battleships.
guy that coordinates with a bunch of Air Force guys.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, so the Air Forces, they have a kind of a 96-hour, cycle where they're planning. Strike packages are planned, put into preparation, then put into execution, and then put into review. So there's like every 24 hours, there's a kind of a new cycle that goes on there generally. And so that target was assigned in that process, and so there was some time there. Now, in that kind of targeting and assignment process, one of the things that you're supposed to be doing there is you're supposed to be recognizing sensitive or high collateral concerns there. So, like when you look at something like, you better be real sure if you're hitting like a mosque or a church or something like that, that's the juice is worth the squeeze, right? Because there's a lot of like political implications associated with that. And even if you're nearby, you also need to be thinking about like the weapons effects associated with, even if you're not striking it, like what are the risks of it? And so one of the things that we would do when we would note with those kind of known sort of scenarios is we might plan our weapons to come in from different angles or at different directions in order to minimize collateral damage associated with some of those sensitive target areas. Um, and so this strikes me um, as one of two things. Um, One is it was an intentional thing. Um, I think that's unlikely, just based upon what I know about the U.S. military. But I don't, we're not fully read into like everything that's happening at the top levels and the command and control. So there may have been like some intel here that talked about like that this was, a cover for certain things. I have no idea, and I don't want to speculate too much there. But sometimes there's things that's just like way above your pay grade, which is just the way it is. But I still think this is pretty unlikely that that's the case. Two is we just didn't have current intelligence as far as like that things had moved there. Um, the actual striking of the target, um, I'm not, the fact that like the missiles were separate and when they came in there, there's just some functionality about how Tomahawks get launched that you can kind of coordinate for simultaneous TOTs. But if you don't have to, it actually kind of makes it easier from a mission planning standpoint to not. Um, that may have been the case. There also could have been when the Tomahawks were being fired, that there was, some discrepancies on the ships that were launching it, for example, that may have been out of position. It also could have just been, or mechanical issues, or it could have just been poor training. So when you fire the missiles, because you have to deconflict the way that they fly too, it's sometimes just easier to separate them by time rather than it is to separate them by space. So you can kind of launch them down similar paths, etc.
So with all that, that's really good. Like how that process works. I think you start with this. School was a few years ago part of the Navy base, part of a military installation that was then converted later. We just didn't get the word, or didn't look at that imagery, or didn't update that imagery. I mean, any guesses on if you take the assumption that this was a planner that looked at this, did their collateral damage assessment, basically assessed that this was still an Iranian military base, that's positive pants on. But I agree with you. I think that's probably the most likely scenario. How is it that we don't have updated intel, or how does the planner look at that target and not say, "Oh, this doesn't look like a military base"?
So kind of a lot going on there. We almost certainly had current imagery. It would be very, very unusual to not do that.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
what could have happened here is that it takes time to do mission planning for some of this stuff, and so one of the potentials here is that um, years ago it was part of a known package, and we planned out for that package, and then on the day of it, rather than doing a review, they just said execute that package, and off it went.
Yeah.
So that's one potential associated with that, and it wasn't reviewed at all recently.
So for folks at home, we have packages we have war plans for just about everywhere you would expect us to have war plans. Korea, Russia, China, everybody. This is what military planners do. We have to have plan A, B, C, and D, because if stuff happens, you don't want to try to you may not have 6 months to do all that planning and catch up. So you've got sort of plans in a binder sitting on a shelf that if something flares up, you pull it off the shelf. So I think that's what you're talking about there. They had a package that had been maybe created 6 or 7 years ago. They just pull it off the shelf and like, here we go.
Yep. So, that's prudent. That's actually what you would expect a professional military to do, is to have all those plans kind of in place and ready to go for that. Ideally, we would have a review process for all those packages before they get shot, so you don't kill a whole bunch of schoolgirls. So I think that does, at a minimum, kind of indicate a certain degree of sloppiness in target review associated with this, and command and control for the U.S. Navy, maybe at the CAOC, potentially at the national intelligence level. But there was clearly multiple steps of a breakdown associated with that. What's really frustrating is, if that's the case, the same thing happened back in Kosovo. I think it was Kosovo or Bosnia, when U.S. Tomahawks went after the Chinese embassy, and where there was a misidentified target, and they struck that. And so, unfortunately, what's old is new again, and that, if you're not getting refined targeting associated with that, we've got some problems.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we should have said this at the top. Tomahawks, this was, early in the campaign. Tomahawks were the weapon of choice here because we hadn't yet achieved air dominance, air supremacy. So in the last week of the war, we've been sending actual airplanes with pilots overhead. And I'm bringing that up because, in Iraq, for me, I was asked to do this kind of target evaluation real time. Like, we were given overhead imagery, but it was usually a few weeks old or maybe a few days old. But like, my first job when I got overhead was to look at the target and ensure that it sort of met all the criteria of the target we were going after. I did my real time collateral damage assessment, et cetera, et cetera. In this case, it's a standoff weapon because we didn't yet have air supremacy. And so you have a planner in a cell looking at that imagery, probably in air conditioning, looking at the target and making their own collateral damage assessment, et cetera. And I look at this, one of the things that frustrates the shit out of me is that you look at that and you're like, from anybody who, I don't know, like I would just say somebody who isn't used to looking at the world from 30,000 feet, it looks odd. You're like, oh, that's a mistake anybody could make, right? But I'll give you an example. This is a bit of a tangent, but just for folks to follow along at home. I was a forward air controller. Part of the reason they put pilots with the infantry to talk to other pilots who are in the air is because I look at the world differently. You might look at a building and say, yeah, it's got an entrance with an awning and it's got 3 windows on the front and in rectangular shapes. Pilots can't see any of that shit. I would describe a building and say it looks like a L shape with 3 air conditioners in the northwest corner on the roof, because pilots are looking at the roof and they look at the shape of the building from the sky. And so anyway,
It's
my
also
point
worth
is, like,
pointing out that if you're at 20,000 feet, you're 4 miles away vertically, right? So, like,
yeah,
think about,
right.
like, what things look like from 4 miles away.
Right. Well, so take that to the next step. You're like, for people who are looking at this, you're like, yeah, that's really hard. They moved a fence. How would you know? The answer is we should know. If you look at overhead imagery like that every day, all day, that's your job. You should know that that fence moved and that there are kids. And that's the other thing, is that we had enough imagery where you could see a playground. Is it sort of from the surface, you're like, oh, they moved the fence. Well, that was a dirty trick. No, it was just like on us as the most powerful military in the world to look at every target and say, yeah, that fence is different. I look at overhead imagery all the time and fences move and I know how to recognize a fence from that imagery. And oh, by the way, there's a whole bunch of kids on a playground there.
Yeah, the one thing I would, for in a pilot sort of scenario, not in a Tomahawk, because, like, whatever. In a pilot sort of scenario, you're bombing very nearby. I wouldn't imagine to see a whole lot of kids outside, or anybody, frankly. They're all probably taking shelter in what they thought was a safe building. So that would complicate, kind of the pattern of life assessment associated with, like, being overhead if you were yourself. But nonetheless, like, you should be, if you were, we have aerial imagery. We should have had the ability to identify that this was a school. Matter of fact, if we didn't do that, that was just sloppy. And then there's just kind of no way around.
Well, I'm not saying this isn't hard. We give props to the U.S. military for doing an amazing job. I think in this case, we should hold the standard high. And this is a mistake that is preventable. We should hold ourselves accountable to that. As an armed forces, we can do better.
Yeah.
Also want to talk about the information war part of it that followed. Within hours, there was a coordinated narrative on social media that Iran had bombed its own school. Trump actually said that, they're very inaccurate with their munitions, trying to sort of muddy the waters and suggest that Iran had done this themselves. But look, I don't know. Did you see that line? Was it pretty obvious to you right away? I mean, because early on, we didn't have the analysis that came out later that actually was a Tomahawk. Did you see that for what it was, or what was your reaction?
I mean, anything that Trump says is almost always bullshit. So, like, anything he says, I'm incredibly skeptical about. That said, he is the president of the United States, so potentially he has access to. He definitely has access to information I don't have. And so,
Well, he said Iran has Tomahawks.
Well, that is flat out false. Um, so, yeah, that's a blatant lie. I would also say that, I've seen some things in social media where people were trying to, like, corroborate that, like, this might be something, like a different Iranian munition that was blown off course because of, jamming from American. Like, if you take it from me, I'm a Tomahawk mission planner. I'm a former pilot. Like, I know how to do, visual ID of what I'm seeing there. The images that we see, even provided by the people that were saying it was like some Iranian thing, that's a Tomahawk. It's a Tomahawk well within its capability windows of being able to do that kind of dive angle. That's what its plan form looks like. That was a Tomahawk. So, yeah, so it's not some Iranian munition. They don't own Tomahawks. It was definitely a Tomahawk. I guess the question could be is like, did the UK fire it potentially, and they're participating in a way that we don't know? That would be like the most like bananas version of it. Um, but the Occam's razor applies here. Trump's full of shit, almost always is. The U.S. is the one that's the only active participant, and we have a bunch of Tomahawks, and that's what the U.S. Navy does. So it's
Yeah.
almost certainly
Yeah.
Tomahawks.
Yeah.
And like, do you remember in the Iraq War there was the what was that? They called him B-1 Bob or
Ba-
something, or
oh,
B-1
Baghdad Bob.
Baghdad Bob. That's right. B-1 Bob is a different guy. Yeah, so in 2003, when the U.S. was preparing and then executing the war in Iraq, there was this
Oh
spokesperson
yeah.
for the Saddam
Yeah.
Hussein
Yeah.
regime, and he would just make up the most fantastic lies in public.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's who the
Yeah.
president of the United
Everything's
States
fine.
is. Yeah,
Everything's fine here. Baghdad's like we got video of Baghdad literally on fire, and he's like, everything's fine here. We're all fine. Everything's just going on as normal. We're winning. You're like, he was
yeah.
on.
So
Yes.
so that's who the president of the United States is. He's just like an absolute liar, pants on fire. Just saying up shit here rather than taking responsibility, which is what you should. Like you and I in our flying days, like the sign of the professional was the guy that called out his own mistakes in the debrief.
Yeah.
And if we're not willing to learn from killing 100 fucking plus school children, and pardon the F bomb, because like those girls deserve better than my coarse language and certainly the disrespect that the president's providing to them. Like if we're not willing to learn from that, like what are we doing?
Yeah. I mean, it is. I think we all accept that bad shit's going to happen in war. I think your point is well taken that when bad shit happens, you need to take accountability for it and at a minimum, figure out how to do it better next time. So that brings me to sort of the next thing I wanted to tee up, which is, UNESCO has called this a grave violation of humanitarian law. I think by the strictest definition, this is not a war crime. It's a mistake. But I don't know. I think the playbook here, as you say, is to sort of avoid accountability when it's the last thing we should do. We should just say, there's a bigger mission here. Bad shit happens. We're going to take every step and not let this happen again. But I don't know. What's your take?
So it's worth pointing out that not in this particular case, in my estimation, but in a lot of cases, the enemy will manufacture war crimes. Right. Baghdad Bob did the exact same sort of things. Like, the same thing happened in Vietnam. They're bombing, formula factories rather than, the fact that like it was a munitions factory. So you have like that clouds a lot of things because that happens in other cases. But when you fuck up, a man takes responsibility, and that's just the way it is. Right. And so I think in order for it to be a war crime, it would have to be intentional.
Yeah.
Like that's the first thing.
Yeah. And this wasn't, I mean, there's no indication this was intentional. This was just a fuck up.
I mean, it's possible that it was intentional. Again, we're not read into that side of the thing there, but I think it's unlikely. I think it's very unlikely. And so again, Occam's razor applies here. If it's unlikely, and just based on what I know of the U.S. military, it wasn't intentional. You have a discussion about the larger attack itself, which is whether that is a crime. We've talked about that before. It doesn't seem to be.
You mean the larger war?
That's
You're talking about that?
exactly. Well, it's not a war, right? It's a strategic strike, or you know what I mean.
Blah,
But
blah,
like,
blah, blah.
right? But like, it's in violation of international. The action itself is in violation of international law in a couple of ways. It's also the darkest gray of gray areas when it comes to U.S. law, because it didn't really get authorization from the Congress, or the best it can be said is that Congress did not actively oppose it. So there's a bigger problem about like the war itself, but this particular action, if you assume that the war itself is not a crime, but it's such a massive fuck up that we need to do better.
All right, last topic. I just wanted to tee you up for, the Navy's job here is to keep sea lanes open, and, the Strait of Hormuz is still effectively closed. So I don't know. I mean, can the Navy get back to, can the Navy do anything about that in the near term? I mean, first, it's broadly, I think I don't know if people recognize that one of the Navy's biggest mission is to keep sea lanes open. Maybe you have a couple of comments on that. But then how do we get the strait open?
I don't think the strait's going to open for a while. I think that's kind of the core thing there. I shared an article with you, just about an hour ago about that 3 different merchant ships were struck in the Straits of Hormuz. The article kind of was published by Bloomberg, but it goes back and forth a little bit about like that there are some days where none are hit, and then others where quite a few are hit. This is 3 ships is a significant amount. Some of them coming right out of port, etc. It is in Iran's strategic interest to exact a pain on the Straits of Hormuz for a while. So I don't think it's going to open for a good bit. And the only potential way for the U.S. to do that would be is if they started doing like serious escorts, which they've said that they would do, and if merchant sailors were willing to participate in those escorts. But they're getting schwacked right now. They're literally like merchant sailors are dying, right? And so insurance companies aren't interested in underwriting that. The ship owners aren't interested in sending their ships into that kind of danger and to lose. Those things aren't expensive, aren't cheap. Like if you were a merchant sailor, like I don't want to fucking die to run oil through the Straits of Hormuz. Fuck you. Like I'm gonna just, I get a port call out of this as the other flip of it. So I'm just gonna sit here and fucking have a Mai Tai and let this fucking blow over. So like I don't think like eventually maybe if the price of oil gets high enough, like I said, you'll have a Leroy Jenkins where somebody will decide like it's worth it and they'll compensate the sailors for the risk, and the US will run that, and maybe that will start to demonstrate it. I think the more interesting is that the last time that the Straits of Hormuz were really threatened, back in the 80s, it was not nearly as capable. The Iranian military was not nearly as capable for kind of shutting it down just based upon like the current weapons technology available at the time. And both the US and the Soviets participated in convoy operations in order to kind of reopen the oil markets associated with that. So right now, China has not a whole lot of incentive to reopen this because they've got enough of a strategic oil thing to kind of let this run for a while and to exact that pain. And from China's strategic interest, the more that the U.S. burns down its anti-air capacity, kind of defending against all sorts of like cheap little drones out of Iran, like the better it is for China. But there could be a thing where eventually the U.S. gets the Chinese diplomatically to tell Iran to stop it, or maybe Chinese Navy starts doing convoy operations in alignment with the U.S. Navy. So there is a little bit of a precedence for that, but like, man, I don't see this thing opening up for a while.
Yeah, the incentives just aren't there. All right, time for the reader mailbag. We got a comment from Anonymous. Why aren't we talking about the Epstein files?
Yeah, why aren't we? Other than the fact that we're killing schoolgirls and like other crimes against women are happening right now, unfortunately. Crime maybe is not the right word, but like injustices are happening against girls and women. So,
seen the movie Wag the Dog, right? I mean, it might as well be big distraction campaign. Anyway, Thumper2265, what's your take on how long the war in Iran? Well, actually, we just talked about that. How long will the war in Iran last? I don't think anybody knows. You want to take a wager? Actually, what does Polymarket say?
I have no idea what Polymarket. I don't keep track of that. My guess, somewhat informed guess here would be that I'd be curious your thoughts too. Like, actually, before I say mine, what do you think yours is?
I think Trump gets tired of it in about 2 weeks. It's over by the end of March.
I don't know if Trump gets the vote, the final say in it. So I think the Iranians, like they have a new supreme leader, another Ayatollah named Khamenei. That guy's got to be a little pissed. You killed his dad, right? So right now, as long as they can kind of hold on this, like they start potentially having some strategic advantage because they can start to exhaust U.S. anti-air capacity. My thought is that this war goes on about as long as the Chinese Strategic Petroleum Reserve stands up. They've got about 4 months is my understanding of oil capacity, and they're not gonna put Iran back on the leash until
Mm.
it starts becoming a problem for them.
All right, I'll bet you $1.
$1 it is. So what's the over under? 2 months? 1 month?
Yeah, well, I would say end of March. If it goes over April, if it goes past April Fool's Day, I'll pay you $1.
Okay, April Fool's Day is $1. Well, that's you can take it to the bank, folks. All right, man. What's going on good in your life?
That I don't have to go to DC. I had a trip planned. I was going to go on the red eye tonight, spend 2 days with Washington DC muckety mucks, and it got canceled. So I'm going to go next week, but at least I don't have to go out now, and that's a good thing. The bad is that I have to go to DC next week.
Okay. You got to go
And
kiss
my
the ring
other,
from time to time, huh?
oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, it's good. I'm getting support, so I mean, I got to go, but yeah, I'd rather just be home. And my other is, we were talking with our producers a couple days ago, and reminded me that I've basically not been on any social media for a long time. So I've gone back to my Twitter. I still can't call it X. It's hard. My Twitter/X
The
account and my
jitter. Is that what we're calling it?
I don't know. And then in Threads, which actually I like better than Twitter anyway. But anyway, I'm at Neal Rickner. I'm going to start Xing again. What are you tweeting? I mean, it's easy to say I'm going to start tweeting again. I don't even
If it's
know.
on X, it's got to be bullshitting, right?
I guess honestly, I don't even know. But anyway, we'll see if I do it. I guess that's why it's my others. Like if I actually do it, I'll be surprised, but I'm going to try.
I see. Okay. Well, Godspeed, young man. I hope you enjoy your time on all those applications. So we've got that. For me, my good is my brother-in-law's in town. He's got some business, so he's coming over for dinner tonight. Ian O'Neill. He's just a very nice human being. He's always kind of a happy-go-lucky guy that will bring you into what you're doing or what he's doing. I don't know. He's just a nice guy. I like him, so he's coming over along with my father-in-law. So, and there is that. For me, the bad is that like winter's kind of dying. Not just like this winter, but just winter more generally. Um, we talked about that a little bit before about like I'm really worried about like the snowpack essentially like just disappearing over the next week because we're getting pretty extreme temperatures pretty early in the season. There's some exacerbating things associated with that. There was a La Nina cycle in the Pacific that is giving way to an extreme El Nino cycle, which normally they don't go back to back quite that hard. And so La Ninas in the West tend to create for warm winters, and El Ninos tend to create for warm summers. So we're looking at a summer that's going to be about 2 degrees Celsius warmer at least on average across the Western United States this summer. So it's going to be rough. I think about that from forest, from snowpack. There's just it's going to be tough. And my other is, and we talked about it, the war in Iran's dragging on. I think Trump is a little bit more out of the driver's seat than he thought he was going to be, or maybe he didn't think about it at all, because that seems to be in keeping with him. But my other here is let's see about what Americans do. I had kind of this theory during the Olympics that the most American part of America is Minnesota, just for kind of standing up for kind of the abuses of their government by building community, and also by winning us a bunch of medals in the Winter Olympics. And I was like, what's more America than Minnesota? But I also think a little bit about like, why does it have to be just Minnesota? Why, what are we going to do to kind of stand up and say that this needs to stop? And so I'm just keeping an eye out there. I told you, the last time we chatted, like I'm super optimistic because I'm starting to see that build up. But I want to see it continue to build. So if you're hearing my voice and you haven't done anything, get the fucking fight. So that's my other.
Right on. Call to action.
There we go. Anyways, that's it for this episode of Hardpoints. Thanks for listening and for being part of the conversation around energy, national security, and the startup economy. If you have a question or a comment about today's show, please send us an email and we may feature it on a future episode. Our email is hardpoints.show@gmail.com. Again, that's hardpoints with an S, hardpoints.show@gmail.com. In addition, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, share it on social media. You can find Neal Rickner there, as we talked about, at Neal Rickner. Look around for me. You might find Climate Mike out there, or Mike versus Climate as well. Thanks again for joining us. Hardpoints is brought to you by the Valor Media Network. We'll see you next time.